get my Zoom on. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our Black Tech Saturdays Virtual AI Series. Before we get started, I think as we are a community-based organization, I'd like to take time to honor um, the late Jesse Jackson, for he has passed today. We really would not be here without the contributions that he and others like him have made. So I just want to take a brief moment of silence for him at this moment. Thank you. Um, Before we get started, I wanted to introduce our esteemed guest today, Shaniece Bennett. She is a certified public accountant, financial instructor, and trusted business advisor. She is noted for her personal approach and for going beyond the numbers to add additional value. Shaniece is the founder of FINM Solutions and Accutrak Consulting and Accounting Services, and she has over 25 years of experience in both public and private practice. She is a nationwide business and financial management instructor for both the public and private sectors. Shaniece has enhanced the financial knowledge of over 2,000 business owners. Shaniece is cited as being an effective translator of financial jargon. She makes complexity simple and easy to use. As a CPA, Shaniece has successfully operated her licensed public accounting firm for 17 years. Her areas of expertise include small business taxation, accounting, payroll, and financial management. Shaniece has helped contractors win prime contracts, pass audit tests, and grow their businesses. Shaniece has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a major in finance. She earned her Master's of Business Administration with a minor in management. Shaniece is a Detroit native and enjoys vacationing on the beach with family and friends. Thank you again for joining us. I am going to pass it back to you. As a reminder for those who have joined us, this recording will be posted on our site following if you'd like to follow along. Without further ado, Shaniece.
Thank you, Lauren, so much for that welcome and introduction. And I'm pretty excited about today's session. As some of you may know my name, I do a lot of teachings around the Detroit as well across the country. And one thing that I like to pride myself on is participation. While I understand that this is being recorded, so we may not necessarily be able to get everyone on camera, I am going to encourage you all to please use the chat. And if you have questions as we go along, please enter your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. But as we go throughout the session with participation, I will be closely monitoring the chat because I am looking for some feedback because I really, really want this to be very interactive. And so with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. Today's session is going to be focusing on scenario planning with AI. And so what we're really looking for is the ability to be able to prepare for growth and uncertainty. And as you think about that topic, I am going to put a question out to you all, and I'm going to look for some answers in the chat. But I want to tell you a little bit about my story as it relates to scenario planning. And so there's a program that I went through several years ago, almost a decade ago, and we had to put together a business plan, for lack of a better word. And in order for me to put together this business plan, I had to pull a whole bunch of information into Excel, which I'll honestly tell you I still use to this day. I had to pull information into Excel, and we had to put together a few scenarios for our business plan. Scenario of what we expected to happen, what we really wanted to happen, and worst case, what if it did not happen? I can tell you all, it took me over 2 weeks to one, do the research, to compile the information and analyze the information, and eventually put together my business plan. 2 weeks. Now, again, this was nearly 10 years ago. And today I'm saying I can do all of that in AI and within a matter of hours. And some components of it we can do in a matter of minutes. So that's the story I want to share with you all about scenario planning and how we leverage AI to help us do it more effectively and efficiently. So with that being said, and hearing my very brief story and seeing the title and topic for today in the chat, I'm interested in hearing from you all. What is it that you would like to get out of today's session? Yes, we have a topic. We're going to spend some time on that topic. But if you don't walk away with something that's valuable and meaningful to you, then why are we here? So I would love for you all to please share in the chat what it is that you want to get out of today's session. And what I will do my best is trying to answer some of those questions or address as many of those points as possible. I know we will not be able to get to everything. I will provide you all with my contact information as well as the ability to get some additional resources. So if you share that information in the chat with me, I will definitely try and get as much of it back to you as possible. I will tell you that our objectives for the next 50 minutes or so, it's going to be focused on multi-scenario modeling. I'll talk to you about what that is. It's a mouthful, multi-scenario modeling. You've heard of the word budget before. For some of you who've attended some of the AI sessions, virtual sessions in the past, we talked one time about budgets. And this time we're going to talk about budgets versus dynamic scenarios. And we're going to focus primarily on our AI-powered scenario planning. And before I get started, I just want to give you all a very quick story about one of our clients who came to us about a year ago. And the primary reason this person came to our firm was because she wanted to minimize her taxes. Now, granted, she has multiple businesses. Some of those businesses have higher profits or more profits than the others. And ultimately, she felt like she was paying too much taxes. She had so many businesses. Why can't she reduce her taxes with all of her other businesses? And I said, that's great. But before we dig into reducing your taxes, let's ask you a few more questions. And we asked quite a few probing questions. And what we really revealed was that, yes, reducing the taxes was part of the overall goal, but the bigger issue was managing cash flows. This business owner had 4 different businesses and cash flows that were very unpredictable. And if we could just get a handle on the cash flows, that ultimately would improve not only her tax position, but her overall cash flow position. And so what we really want to do is to take that information. I understand the goal may have been to reduce the taxes, which ultimately impacts the cash flow. But sometimes we come into sessions or consultations, or we have a goal in mind and we can reach that goal. But sometimes there is an underlying problem that we may not have considered. In this case, for this client, there was an underlying problem with cash flow management. And we were able to solve the cash flow management problem, which ultimately impacted her to be in a better tax position. So with that being said, I'm also interested to know, I saw a few folks type in the chat, they want to be able to understand better valuation processes for mergers and acquisitions, which is great. How to target companies with high cash flows and low operating costs across industries. I'm curious to know from those who are on the call right now, I have a polling question. How do you currently plan for your uncertainty? How do you currently plan for uncertainty? I have on the slide 5 different options here. A being you use some sort of dynamic tool or you already work with a consultant. Go ahead and put that in the chat. Do you use some sort of static annual budget like an Excel spreadsheet I just described to you? Or maybe you all have some old budget templates that you've worked with before. Or is it really like a gut feeling? Hey, this is what I think is going to happen, so this is how I'm going to plan for it based on what I know. Or some people says, what is planning? I've never done planning before. I'm really interested to gauge the audience. And again, I will do my best to tailor the lesson today around what those of you are currently doing. I see there's also a roll call. Make sure you all go ahead and fill in the poll question for the roll call. We like to get an idea of who our audience is so we can continue to tailor solutions and content specifically for you. And so I'm seeing quite a few folks respond to my poll question and it's saying primarily uncertainty. I try, but you utilize some sort of past budget. And that's what I want to talk to you all about a little later. Oftentimes, historically, when we've attended business school, for those of you all who work with some of the business service organizations around here, we tend to focus on this thing called a business plan or some sort of budget. And what we have now with AI is the ability to do more dynamic budgets. So the person who put in the chat that says, I want to learn about M&As and identifying companies with across multiple industries, AI is going to be the answer for you. So let's go ahead and dig in. Again, we want to talk about three very brief topics, and then we're going to practice by action. And so I hope you all have access to either your phone to get onto your chat GPT or whatever AI tool you have. Go ahead and get that ready now. I'm going to spend some time taking you through some basics, and then we're going to practice what we learn. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about one type of scenario model. It's called the three scenario model. And in my opinion, it's probably one of the most widely used because it's the one that makes the most sense. What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? And what's more likely to happen? And so whether you run a business or whether you run a nonprofit, whether you're currently working in another company, when it comes to what's next for your organization, what you want to focus on is what's the desired outcome for your organization. So this is where the scenario modeling comes in. We have a desired outcome, which could probably be considered the best case scenario. And then we have the most likely outcome, things that are probably going to happen if we status quo, we continue going on with our operations or our current work with the way we've been doing it. And then there's also worst case scenario. So I want to briefly define what these scenarios are. And as you think about your opportunities that you're evaluating and the scenarios, you can put them into these three buckets. Ultimately, you need three different outcomes. So for example, under the best case scenario, we're looking at growth accelerating. You can accelerate growth by increasing your revenues, increasing your profit margins. Maybe your growth is going to be expansion into multiple markets. Maybe growth for you is hiring new employees or maybe getting more contracts. So when we think of best case scenarios, we think of acceleration, growth, increase, again, new revenues from new customers or because you expanded into a new location, or maybe even additional funding. When I say funding, it can even be access to capital. If that's part of your growth plan, you may need to raise some funding so that you can launch your new product or service. So that's the best case scenario. What would that outcome be? Worst case scenario is just the opposite. Well, if we don't get the funding, this is what would happen. Things such as our costs could increase. You probably have issues with delays in delivering your product or your service to your clients or your customers, or your revenues drop. Maybe you lose a contract altogether. Maybe you have to shut the doors to your operation. When it comes to scenario planning, we have to think of the possible outcomes first. And so I just gave you an example of a best case and a worst case scenario. I'm curious to hear from you all in the chat. What are some best case scenarios for your current opportunity, whether it be your opportunity for your current business, for your current nonprofit, the opportunity for your current job? Maybe you're thinking about changing something in your life. What is the best case scenario? I'm asking you all to share that information in the chat, because sometimes when we hear things said differently by someone else, like, oh, yeah, that is a potential scenario. And remember, you need to have those outcomes in order for you to do scenario planning. So if you all would not mind sharing in the chat how you would describe a best case scenario, someone else may be able to leverage that information as well. And then the third model in the three scenario model is the most likely model. This is what I like to refer to as the baseline. This is currently what you're doing. If you were to maintain everything you're currently doing in your current organization, on your current job, the economy stays stable the way it is right now, you just maintain status quo. It is going to be critical to understand what that most likely scenario looks like. And if you're currently operating your own business or nonprofit, then your historical financials, that is going to be the baseline. And you will need that baseline information for whatever opportunity you're trying to evaluate with scenarios, because we have to be able to give AI some information about what we're currently doing. And that's going to be your most likely situation. And if you want to just keep it simple, just say, hey, I'm going to continue to do things the way I've always been doing things. So as I look into the chat, I see someone saying that seller finance deal with at least a 30% ROI. I absolutely love it. The seller finance deal is the outcome, but the desire on that is a 30% return on investment. That's a very good starting point for an outcome when it comes to developing a scenario and doing some scenario analysis. Someone also said they would like knowledge on being a nonprofit with a profit arm. That's a great topic. Unfortunately, we're talking today specifically about AI and scenario planning, but at the end of this today's session, I will give you some contact information and we could definitely follow up one-on-one regarding having a nonprofit with a for-profit arm. Continuing with the scenario modeling, I want to talk a little bit about budget versus AI scenario planning. I won't spend too much time on budget because we already have a video out there you can go back and watch. But I did notice that one of our participants says that this is how they currently plan. We use a budget that we've had in the past. And some of the drawbacks of that budget is that it's very static. In other words, it sets a target or maybe even a range of targets. And usually when we look at budgets, we're looking at an annual basis. Well, I need money today or tomorrow. I can't wait for 12 months from now for this budget to fall into place for me to get my 30% ROI. What do I need to do right now? And that's what scenario planning does. Scenario planning will say, hey, I understand your budget is a 12-month goal. But what is it that you need to do in the next week, the next 30 days, the next quarter, the next 6 months? Scenario planning with AI gives you that insight. It really gives you the ability to identify outcomes and things that you can do right now to help you achieve that outcome. But more importantly, what I like about scenario planning, it also challenges the decision making and the thinking that we have. Going back to when you created that budget, and I'm going back to the exercise or the example I gave you all 10 years ago when I was creating my business plan, I had to do a whole lot of research on my particular industry that I was looking for. And it was based on what I knew. What I did not know, I just didn't know. But the beauty of AI is you can plug information in, such as a seller finance deal. And what you will notice is like a seller finance deal, AI will come back and say, for what? Are you trying to sell a product? Are you trying to sell a service? Because those may have different results. And that's the beauty of scenario planning. It does challenge the way we think. In my opinion, it educates us on what we should be thinking of. The other thing about budgets, I'm not sure if you all heard this, but back in the day, yeah, we lived by budgets. But truth shows and research shows that 90% of budgets are typically outdated within 90 days. Just think about where we are right now in the economy compared to where we were right before the holidays. A whole lot has changed. And so if you're basing your actions today off of a budget you created 90 days ago, well, it's already outdated. And so that's why we want to spend more time on scenario planning. And the other thing I like about scenario planning versus budgets, when we do our budgets, we're really using the information we already have or research that we've already gathered to get to some final result or some desired outcome. Well, when you get to that desired outcome, what are the trade-offs for that? For example, I'll tell you all, when I was putting together my business plan 10 years ago, it was whether or not we wanted to take our firm into government contracting. At the time, it's like, okay, what's going to be the upside? That's all we were focused on. What's the upside of going into government contracting? What we did not consider were the trade-offs. For example, back then and now, with government contracting and the ability to outsource work overseas, we could not do that with government contracting back then. And so part of our growth required us to hire. We're in a situation where, like many of you, good employees or talented employees sometimes are very difficult to come by because they're being grabbed by other companies. And so outsourcing becomes a great opportunity. And so while looking at our opportunity to go into government contracting 10 years ago, it's like on the upside, that looked great. What we did not consider was the ability to hire qualified people. And oh, by the way, in order to hire those people, it's going to cost us a whole lot more, which we did take into account, but they weren't available. And so then opens up the opportunity for overseas. Well, for some contracts, you cannot have overseas workers. And so what are some of the trade-offs? Scenario planning will help you to address those things that you may not necessarily see or acknowledge when you're creating your budget. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Primarily looking at scenario planning, but I want to talk about scenario planning with AI. Like I said, I could consider at the time the cost of employees. What I did not consider at the time was if I can't find them, then what? And so when it comes to AI, there's a lot of possibilities out there with AI. We move from what we call static or isolated budgets that are just based on a set point in time to a more dynamic, fast, and holistic insights utilizing AI. We can analyze more data at one time, and we are going to do that today. It does the calculations a whole lot faster. Granted, I'm pretty good with creating formulas in Excel, but it does take me some time to create the formula before the calculations occur. I can just plug numbers or even upload information to AI, and it does the calculations in a matter of seconds. It also reveals some dependencies with information. I just gave the example of hiring. And so it's one thing for me to say this is how much an auditor would cost in Detroit versus an auditor down in the South. But what are some of the dependencies there? What about scheduling and even overseas? What about the hours? It's like, yeah, if you're considering you're uploading information or you're analyzing the information, well, maybe you are thinking of outsourcing to an overseas company. What are some of the other challenges you have to face, like having dedicated servers and things of that nature? AI will reveal that information to you by asking some questions. And the thing I like about it the most is it minimizes the guesswork. At the end of the day, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. We can plug all the information into AI that we are aware of, but what about those things that we are not aware of? AI helps us to minimize that guesswork. So as I go along, I'm looking at the chat. I saw someone ask a question, one example, give an example for those of you all who will be reviewing this later. An example of a best case scenario is to get recognized as a staple service to help your clients. So it's kind of like that brand awareness or just being made known. That would be a great desired outcome. How can AI help us with this path? Well, I'm glad you asked because what we're getting ready to do now is I want to show you all how to prompt AI. But for this example here, I want you all to use the example on the chat and I'm going to go ahead, on the slide, and I'm going to paste this prompt in the chat. And what I want you to do is to open up your AI tool, whether you use Gemini, OpenAI, Perplexity. Perplexity happens to be the one I prefer. And I want you to type in the chat this prompt. I am the founder of an app that connects business owners with business support organizations in the Detroit area. I'm looking to hire 2 people. What is the best, worst, and likely scenario of hiring someone? And so I want you all to take a few minutes to type that into your tool. And when you get a response in the chat, just give me a thumbs up or say, hey, I got a response. I'm curious to know how many people are able to, one, leverage AI to do scenario planning using a very simple prompt like this. We will get to some additional prompts where you'll be able to tailor it on your own. But for right now, I'm really interested in getting your feedback by you either putting a thumbs up in the chat or maybe even just saying, hey, I got a response. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're providing your AI tool with some basic information to help with scenario planning. Basic information I want you to know. You have to tell what kind of business you're looking at or what kind of organization you are in. It would be nice to have some geographic information. That's why I plugged in Detroit, because Detroit is completely different from the South. And when it comes to hiring, the wage rates up here in Detroit are slightly different from other parts of the country. And then more importantly, your prompt has to ask ChatGPT or AI a question. The question that we are asking is what's the best, worst, and most likely scenarios of hiring someone? So we have 3 questions technically we are asking our AI tool. I want to give you all a few more minutes. I see some folks have got some responses. And what I'm going to do is to show you what I utilize ChatGPT with this same exact prompt. Here's the answer that I got. You can see the icon there. So this is Gemini, and it was telling me I can give you a clear set of scenarios. But first, one quick question. What roles, skill sets are you hiring for? It gave me some examples. And if you don't know, it'll make an assumption for me and just keep it general. And then it says below are concise, best, that's what I asked for, most likely and worst case scenarios, plus some key risk and quick mitigations. Now, what I don't have on the slide, I had about 5 or 6 different paragraphs from ChatGPT answering that question for me. And in there, it gave me a whole lot of great information. And so for the person who says, how can AI help direct us on this path? When you put your prompt in, if there's not enough information in your prompt, ChatGPT will come back to you, or your AI tool will come back to you and say, I need some more information from you. And what it will also do, depending on how often you utilize your tool or what information you've already put into your tool, it will propose some answers for you. And so this is the response that I was originally given from ChatGPT. And I'm like, well, that's pretty great. It's a whole lot of information. So, what I really, really want you all to understand is what is possible with AI planning, scenario planning. And again, while we're asking for three different scenarios in this case, that's not the right question. While we're asking for three different scenarios in this case, what I ultimately asked ChatGPT to do was to take that. I told you it was like 5 or 6 different paragraphs. I asked ChatGPT to create me a chart just to summarize all this information. Thank you so much. I see Georgia has something in the chat what she received, and it's great. And I'll be honest, I'm a visual person, but when ChatGPT gave me back those 5 paragraphs, yes, that was great. I can read through it, but I simplify it for me. And so when I went back and I said, can you create a table summarizing this information? Now on the slide right now is what you see. Over to the left, you can see that the scenarios has the best, worst case, and most likely. It also talks about the assumptions, and we really have to focus in on assumptions. And that's going back to the beginning where I said, when it comes to scenario planning, you have to have a desired outcome in place or in mind. And the more assumptions that you develop, and to me, an assumption is nothing more than an educated guess based on what we already know. An assumption. So here, ChatGPT said in the best scenario, we can hire 2 FT full-time hires. That's the assuming that you're going to have 2 full-time hires, where the worst case scenario says PT, assuming that you'll have 2 part-time hires. What can your revenue be? I didn't give ChatGPT any numbers. How in the world could it figure out what my revenue was going to be? Well, that's because I do utilize ChatGPT, so it has some historical information in there about me and my company. You will have to provide your AI tool with some information. That's that baseline information, that historical financial information, that status quo. You will have to provide it with some information if you want to get numbers back. For example, the person who said, I want a 30% ROI, 30% of what? So you may have to be able to provide some assumptions, 30% of how much you invest, 30% of what you're currently making in terms of profit. That's all going to be important. But look at the additional information that this chat GPT or this AI tool gave us. It also gave us information about monthly net cash flows. Now, how could it figure out my monthly net cash flows, especially the amount of spending, if I didn't give it that information? Once again, it made some assumptions, and it will share those assumptions with you if you go back and read all 5 paragraphs. I'm not doing that, but it will give you some insight, and you can look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, that's just not my number. Go in there and make a change to it. Update whatever information that AI give you to more accurate information or information that's more applicable to your business. But what I love about this chart or this table that I asked AI to summarize for me was the notes that it gave me. And so when we say we don't know what we don't know, I don't know what questions to ask, look at the most likely scenario. After it calculated what it thought my revenue and cash flows would be, it also says that, hey, staggering hires or maybe starting with a part-time person will help to reduce our risk. That's going back to that additional insight, removing a lot of the guesswork that we typically have to do on our own. Like, I understand I got to figure out how much it's going to cost to hire some people, but what's the timing of that hiring? Chat GPT or your AI tool gives you those solutions and those recommendations. And so that's how you're going to leverage AI with scenario planning. I want to pause right here, and I understand we have about 20 minutes left. I am going to leave some time at the end for questions, but what I really want you all to understand before we move on to the next section is it's important, one, that you ask your AI a question. and you have some proposed outcomes. That's the scenario. And then more importantly, you may have to give your AI tool some additional information. And even if you don't know what that additional information needs to be, oftentimes your tool will come back and ask you for that information. I want to go back a couple of slides because I want to show you the response that I got from ChatGPT. It says, I can give you a clear set of scenarios, but in this case, it said one quick question. And it actually gave me a whole bunch of other information like part-time hiring and things of that nature. I can go in and say, okay, yes, I agree with part-time hiring, but maybe instead of hiring in the summer, let's say we hire this person in the fall. How is that then going to impact my cash flows? We must be able to provide some information to the tool in order to get the best response. I'm going to pause right quick to see whether or not we had any questions submitted in the chat before we go on to our next exercise. So far in the chat, I'm seeing some of the good results. Someone else, I'm going to share this. Use the same prompt. And one of the things that the AI said is you hire mission aligned, community rooted people. Well, we didn't put any of that information into ChatGPT. So I'm assuming that this user, Georgia, you are already using ChatGPT. So yes, it has a baseline of who you are and what you're looking for. It also tells you how you can help improve the app through real user feedbacks. For example, faster adoption in Detroit neighborhoods, strong relationships that would support organization, maybe even reducing workload for you as a founder. Really, really good information. And so we did that in what, 10 minutes tops with me talking? A whole lot of good insight there. But I know you all are really, really interested in being able to utilize AI to do your own scenario planning. So what I'm going to ask you all to do now is in the AI tool that you're currently using, I want you to consider increasing your pricing by 15%. So whether you're a business, a nonprofit, consider you're going to increase something by 15%. Maybe it's going to increase your funding. Maybe you want to increase your pricing. Maybe you want to increase your number of contracts by 15%. What you want to do is to go into ChatGPT and say, my current monthly revenue is, and put a dollar amount in there. It doesn't have to be a real number, but just put a dollar amount in there and let it know that you currently serve how many customers or clients or benefactors per month. And then ask the question, and will should have two L's in it, how will this impact my business taxes? How will this impact my business taxes? Go ahead, put that into your prompt. And as you're putting that into the prompt, I am going to go ahead and review some of the questions that came through the chat. So there's one question from Shannon. Hey, Shannon, what are currently the best AI tools you use to evaluate and execute succession planning? Because you're currently working on building some agents. And what are the most reliable AI agent tools active for evaluating financials and industries that usually need someone with specialty or someone with technical or specific industry experience? Great questions. So you asked me what I use. I'm going to tell you what I use. I am a member of the AICPA, which is the organization that regulates all CPA firms. So we use AI agents and AI tools specific to our industry. Now, CPAs can serve all industries. And so as a member of the AICPA, I did subscribe to other industries that we serve. For example, when we serve nonprofits and constructions, we pay for tools that, one, are approved by the CPA.com because we have to protect our clients' information. Now, that means not everyone can get access to that information. And so when it comes to developing AI agents, and unfortunately, but fortunately, I do know what that is. We won't talk about it here because we've developed some AI agents through Perplexity based on guidelines and insight that we receive from our industry experts or our industry guidelines. And so that's where we would go. So to my answer to you, Shannon, I would research and investigate different tools that are unique and specific to the industry, not necessarily individuals or consultants, but reputable tools that are unique to the industry, and maybe consider utilizing those tools. And then from the industry, they can plug in things, parameters is what we would say. They're can plug into parameters into their AI agents. One, to make sure it brings in information from reputable sources. That's always a challenge from us, which is why I like to use Perplexity, because Perplexity gives you all the sources. I'm a researcher just for fun. And so when you give me an answer, there is a way in the other tools you can say cite your source. Perplexity is going to automatically give me that because that's kind of how I have it programmed. So hopefully that answers your question for you. It says it would also be nice to connect with other people actively applying prompts and contextual engineering in Detroit. Well, that's why BTS is here. They're connecting us together. And I would say just stay connected with BTS. Stay connected with me. I know, Shannon, you do already. But those are some great questions. And I'm glad we had an opportunity to get those questions answered for you and give you some insight there. But I'm kind of curious to hear from some of you who used the AI to plug in the prompt that says, what if you increased your pricing or increased something by 15%? What were some of the responses that you received? Go ahead, enter that information into the chat, because what I want others to be able to see is how different AI tools, and if you have an AI agent, can give you different responses. And oftentimes it's, while they get different responses, the information is heavily dependent upon several things, such as how much information have you already plugged into that same chat GPT tool or the AI tool, or maybe even that same thread, because it will leverage the information that you've already provided to your AI tool and help answer some of the questions that you pose in the form of a prompt. And so if anyone is willing to share, please feel free to put that information in the chat. What was the outcome? I'll tell you the reason why I utilized this particular prompt is going back to the example that I gave you all about the client that came to us and said, hey, I want to reduce my taxes. Now, the prompt to us was, I have all these businesses. Yes, some of them are profitable, but I want to reduce my taxes. Well, we need a little bit more information from you to help you reduce your taxes. And so we started to ask specific questions like, well, what's your profit margins right now? What kind of customers are you handling and working with now? And I'll be honest with you, when it came down to reducing the taxes, it was more so managing the cash. But what we also discovered for that particular client, because they had so many clients, there were some customers that were just, let's just say that 80-20 rule, where they were spending so much of their time, 80% of their time on, but getting less than 20% profit margins from those customers. And so one of the outcomes of that consulting or consultation we had, or consulting agreement, because it went over several months. The agreement we had was, hey, maybe you need to go back and either adjust your pricing, hence the 15% increase. And one of the reasons why we suggested increasing the prices, because ChatGPT told us that based on one of her companies, if you increase your pricing over 7%, you're going to have some attrition. Some people are just not going to pay it. Well, guess who those people were? The folks she was spending 80% of her time with and only getting 20% of her profit margin. And so for her, yes, her top line may have decreased because of the number of customers. However, the amount of time that was freed up for her to focus on things such as cash flows was increased. And so that was again, you came to me asking for a way to reduce your taxes, and not just through chat gpt, but through asking some questions and utilizing some of the tools that we do use from .cpa.com. We were able to come up with quite a few recommendations. And when I say quite a few, it was quite a few. It was a lot. And I'm like, hey, nobody has time to implement all of these. Which ones do you want to focus on and prioritize? And one of the first things she decided to do was to increase her pricing by 15%. And within 60 days, some of those trouble clients, is what she called them, was like, hey, we no longer can afford your services. And for her, it was an easy, or I should say not easy, it was a justifiable reason for saying, no problem, we can refer you to someone else. And so that was not the original goal when she came in. The original goal was, how do I reduce my taxes? And here you have all these other solutions. And that was very simple and easy to do. Her question about reducing taxes definitely requires some additional time with analyzing the other businesses and things of that nature. But it was a response that AI generated that was so quick and easy for her to implement, while we continue to work on building out her tax planning and her other strategies for increasing or improving her overall cash flow. And that's the purpose of today's session, is to figure out how can we utilize AI to help us put together those scenarios. But more importantly, once it gives us the answers, how can we implement? One of the things I do want to call out, and I want to share this on the next slide, is when it comes to AI scenario planning, we like to work with a framework. In other words, it's just a path to get to the outcome that you're looking for. And it's a very basic framework, and there are 5 components of this framework. The variables, that's the information that you input into your tool, such as the type of business you want, the number of customers, where you're located. What are those variables going to be? And then the second component of a good framework is identifying the scenarios. You have to tell your AI tool or your AI agent what your desired outcomes are, or what it is that you're looking to analyze. So those are the scenarios. And again, I recommend at least 3, maybe a best case, worst case, and more likely scenario. So then you define, what does that look like? What does that look like? Does that look like a new location for me? Does that look like a 30% return on investment? That's definitely a scenario, but you would also have to give it those variables. And then you have to build out some assumptions. And this is where AI will come back and say, hey, I know this is what you told me, but if you give me this information like what types of employees, are you going to hire someone full-time or part-time? Are you looking to stay in the Metro Detroit area, or are you looking to go outside of Metro Detroit? And then those assumptions will trigger different responses from your AI tool. And those responses will give you some outcomes, and hopefully you'll go back and say, okay, yes, I hear that assumption, but let me modify this a little bit. And you can do this all within a matter of minutes, folks. And so as long as you have this framework, you've put some thought into what your scenarios or what your outcomes could be. You put some thought into what those assumptions are, like full-time versus part-time, 30% return versus 10% return, and what those outcomes will look like. That's the visualization exercises I think we all have to go through, because AI is only going to give you some recommendations. When I say recommendations, I am serious about that. These are recommendations. This is not something that's saying that if you do this, this is exactly what's going to happen, because it doesn't work out that way. If we had AI back before 2020, would AI have been able to predict the shutdown for COVID? Probably not. But if our outcome, I'm sorry, if our scenario was worst case scenarios, the country shuts down. If someone had thought of that as a potential scenario, I'm quite sure the AI agent could have given us some suggestions as to what we could do, or possible scenarios, along with some modes or some ideas and recommendations for implementation. So we have reached the end of the scenario planning training. At this point in time, and I do this with every session, I would like to open it up for questions. And these questions are not just limited to AI scenario planning. I'm a CPA, folks. The only thing I tell you is I don't give tax advice in a public setting. And so if there are any questions that have come through the Q&A, I'm going to ask our host to let me know. Feel free to put those questions in the chat. But if you have any questions related to AI as it relates to financials, your business, your nonprofit, this is the time to ask. But I am going to tell you now, I do not give tax advice in public settings. And so with that being said, I'm going to ask our host to see whether or not there were any questions. All right. So there are a few techies out here that work on solutions, and some of the solutions in the chat are Amphit AI and Think Technologies. I would also say that I've personally gotten some great information from some YouTube-based tutorials as well. I like Make, capital M-A-K-E, to support the agent infrastructures. Thank you so much, Shannon. This was some great information for some of the participants who are already working in this space with AI tools. Some other things I would tell you all is, when it comes to building out the AI agents, YouTube is great. However, one, it takes time to really YouTube. And then the other thing, it takes time to implement. And so this is going back to the question that Shannon, one of the participants, asked, what kind of tools do you already use? And I say, hey, I subscribe, because they've already done a lot of that work for us. But I still have to learn how to use the tool. And then I also realize that the results that I get from my AI agent are not golden. What I mean by that is is not necessarily 100% accurate, and it does not apply to every scenario or every situation. And I much rather spend my time on taking the suggestions from AI and then figuring out how it best applies to my client or how it best applies to the person that I'm working with. And that's only because I have a limited amount of time. It's only 24 hours in a day. You do what you do with yours. I know if I even got one extra hour, it still would not be enough time. So I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out how to develop AI agents. I invest, and that's my keyword. I invest in tools that have already done that. Those tools will give me they have the framework already for me to input that information, and then I leverage those outcomes and see how it works best for my clients. And so if you don't have a whole lot of time where you want to go out and learn how and watch YouTube videos or even create your own AI agents, consider some of those recommendations, some of those tools that were provided in the chat from some of our participants, where a lot of that legwork is done. You always have to invest some time into learning the tool, no matter what tool you use. It's just like having a group of employees, and we're implementing a couple of new softwares right now. It will be a nightmare for me to implement a new tax software and not give my team any training on how to use the software. So make sure that you set aside some time into learning how to use your tool. And one of the things that I've learned with prompting with different AI tools is I know what I'm looking for. At least I think I know what I'm looking for. And I'll go in there and I'll say, I think I'm looking for this, or I want more information. And let's just talk about that ROI. I want more information on how to get funding for mergers and acquisitions for another, let's say, accounting firm, since that's what I am. I'm trying to acquire another accounting firm. I want more information on how to go about get financing. And I'll go put that into my AI tool and see what it comes back and says, or I will add a little bit more, but I don't know where to start. What suggestions do you have? That's my prompt. I have learned so much from AI by utilizing that prompt. What suggestions do you have? So my AI agent, I call him Skyrocket. Hey, Skyrocket, I'm doing something such and such. What do you suggest? What recommendations do you have? And that's one way. But then you have to sit there and literally have a conversation. But it goes by really quickly. I'll get responses in like 30 seconds or some less sometimes. And so if you have the time, I encourage you all to play around with it. I'm checking the chat before I get ready to exit here. I want to share with you all a couple ways to connect with me, and I'll check the chat for more questions. But sometimes folks are always interested in obtaining a copy of the slides, and I'm more than happy to give you all a copy of the slides. On the on the slide right now, you have a QR code that says scan here. If you scan here, you go ahead and fill out some information about how I can send you the slides. We're going to ask you for a little bit of information about you and your business or your organization, and we'll send you copies of the slides. Also, if you want to stay connected, and on LinkedIn is generally where I do a lot of my posts about AI, upcoming events, how I'm utilizing different tools. If you want to follow along and maybe even learn about some other opportunities, I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So feel free to scan either QR code if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Shaniece Bennett. And if you would like to get access to the slide deck and also be kept in the loop about upcoming events related to financial training, whether it be through BTS or even other AI tools, if I'm aware of it and you're interested and you sign up and say, hey, I'm interested in knowing about these tools, I'll be more than happy to share that information with our community here. With that being said, I'm going to keep this up for a moment. I'm going to go over to check to see whether or not there were any additional questions in the chat. Again, I like to leave 10 minutes of time or some time. We have about 10 more minutes here. If there are any other finance related questions or AI related questions, I don't proclaim to be an AI specialist, but I will say I use it every day, all day. Again, perplexity is my friend. Me and Skyrocket, we have really good conversations. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and just give opportunity for folks to ask more questions, share more information in the chat, and then I'm going to hand it back over to our host to see whether or not there are any closing remarks. I am checking the chat. What are currently the best AI tools? I think we answered that question already. Working with building reliable AI agents. Thanks, Shannon, so much for your participation. Hopefully I gave you some good insight there. Anyone else before we hand it back over to you, Lauren? I'm gonna take a sip of tea, folks.
Looks so
Oh,
good,
thank
girl.
you.
You know what? While we let the chat load up. I just want to thank everybody for joining, and let's just everybody just give a hand clap in the reactions to our great speaker today. She was absolutely phenomenal. I had a past life in finance with scenario planning, and she hit every note on the head. And fusing that with your knowledge for AI was just absolutely invaluable. Please, you guys, once this recording drops, I even just implore you, help us spread this information with your friends, with your colleagues, because this is really important to the health of all of our businesses. We can build the best products ever, but if we don't have the right assumptions built into our financial models, they will go nowhere. So, I'd also like to note that on the note about virtual agents, our previous session kind of went through the fundamentals of building virtual agents as well. And so if you'd like something a little bit more interactive, our last presenter has also left her contact information. Um, and or I'm sorry, the session before last, and you can go and reference that information as well as her contact to support you in building your agents. Um, I don't know if there are any other questions or if anybody else said anything. Let me see, everyone. I don't see anything, but thank you again. We're going to close out. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.